Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome back to VUX World. Happy New Year, 2025. Going strong, starting strong. Usually there's a bit of music there. The stream's not working for some reason, so we're recording this separately to the live stream. But welcome back. Welcome back. My throat's going a little bit. I've had a bit of a rough week. I did myself a favour, or at least what I thought was a favour, which was I signed up for a half marathon. To do it in the middle of February to get myself over the Christmas binge of alcohol and food. And I did myself a nice training plan, supposed to start on Sunday, woke up on Sunday morning, and the whole garden, the whole area is completely full of snow. So that was cancelled. The next day was cancelled as well because the snow's still there. The kids haven't been to school. The snow's still here, and I've managed to pick up a cold. So the week has been a mental week thus far, but we're going on strong anyway. And I'm joined today by Alannah Martin, who's the value owner of Ovo Energy. Welcome, Alannah. Nice to speak to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Kane. I'm glad to be here.
Nice one. Yeah, my plans were severely scuppered, and so it's been a mad week. I trust your week has been more productive than mine.
A lot less eventful. No snow, which is pretty odd considering that I'm in Scotland and we were forecast for it. I'm not complaining. I'm being grateful. So yeah, pretty busy, but nothing that's thrown me off my track so far.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you for joining us. Appreciate that. Appreciate the time, and thank you for kicking off 2025 on VUX World, which is brilliant. One thing I find interesting is the title value owner. Maybe we can start there. What does a value owner do? It's a very peculiar title.
I know it's an odd one, isn't it? And it is such a common question. So basically, value owner is, I guess, an equivalent of a product owner that doesn't actually work within the tech space because I'm not in our product team. I don't lead developers, front and back in any of that. I work within our operational space. And I guess it's the case of what operational value am I responsible for delivering? Well, we're looking at our customer experiences on our channels, whether that's contacting us on voice or web chat and trying to improve that experience. And there is obviously an element where then we have technology that complements it. But that's to differentiate and actually give recognition to the fact that it is a separate role than the product managers.
Right, interesting. Okay, that sounds good. So, it's essentially the equivalent of a product owner, but sans technology.
I would
Sans being
say
the Spanish for without.
you're utilizing technology, but you're not the teams that are responsible for the specific things that a product team would do.
Right.
So we're looking at continuous improvement. We're going to Gemba where we can help design and collaborate, obviously, and work with the product teams we do, but we obviously don't have that specific skill set within our team, and we work in collaboration with them.
I'm with you. And you've got a very impressive background in an area which is an extreme fascination of mine, which is Lean Six Sigma. Where did the fascination with Lean Six Sigma come from?
So years ago, when I was working at the time as like a subject matter expert within any of our business, a colleague of mine who was a Lean Six Sigma practitioner had basically said, could I help him understand how to create an automated process for some of our huge, massive volume transactional requests? I was a shooter, of course, and it just kind of stemmed from there. I guess I got a bit of a bug and an interest in it. I'd always been really fascinated in ways to find efficiencies in my own work individually. And I guess I thought, well, this is a way to make it on scale and to also move beyond the limit of just like one department that I was in. And, it went from there. I completed my training. I did like a Kaizen after doing my yellow belt. And we had really good training through our partners with PMI, who still the same company that we do our training with. And I've just been really interested in it. Like, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of intense learning going on and tests and projects to get certified. But I think it's been very worthwhile. Something that I would recommend to people. And I know that there's lots of people who say that they've done these courses where they've maybe done it like online without actually having the expertise of people who have that professional experience. But I think it does make a world of difference to have that support, because it's not just a case, as you know, of in theory knowing what to do. It's actually working with people and having that network to communicate with and discuss, because You're not going to go away from a week or 2 week training course and have all the answers.
Yeah, if only it was that simple.
I know.
Yeah, we had an episode, I was just checking there, with Scott Hamilton, and we kind of discussed a little bit about kind of like the benefits of understanding lean principles when it comes to automation design and conversation design and stuff like that. So maybe for those who haven't heard that, and for those who maybe is kind of a bit fresh to this topic, maybe it'd be interesting to maybe just briefly define Lean Six Sigma and lean kind of process design, if you like, but also where you see the value in your role, because obviously lean comes from the kind of manufacturing, kind of like physical processing and distribution of goods and services, etc. So, but the application to software is obviously apparent. So maybe we could, for those who maybe not know, maybe it's like a little bit about kind of like what is lean and how can it be applied into an area like conversational AI or AI automation.
Yeah, of course, that's a great question, good place to start. So for me, the way that I've come to think of it is Lean Six Sigma is about producing whatever it is, whether it's a product or an experience, on target. What are your specifications that you need with minimal variation and waste? So, that for me helps me translate, okay, you could use it in a manufacturing space, which obviously has had a lot of grounding in there, but you could actually take it to product, you could take it to customer experiences, really anything. And the way that I think about it in terms of automation and the way that it was explained to me when I was, if I go back in my mind and think about my experience when I was new to it, is that if you try and just automate something without actually trying to improve the process, then all you're going to do is compound it and actually realize that you're putting even more strain if your process is filled with defects and variation that were never intended. If you automate it, you're not actually improving the process. So you have to start there and then look to automate. And I think that is a little bit disappointing for people when they think that automation is going to be the cure to all their problems. But in doing that and taking the time to understand your process and look at what actually is like satisfactory for you, your customer, whether that's internal, external, or both, and what can you remove that actually, there's always going to be some degree of variation in your experiences or manufacturing, but what can you remove that isn't necessary, that isn't like what would be called like common cause variation, and frankly get better output, whether that's saving time or money, and ultimately time is money. So
yeah,
you can definitely apply it to any area.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to the automation side of things, like the terminology of waste, I think kind of catches people or confuses or has a potential to confuse. But and there's obviously lots of different types of waste, isn't there, in lean?
Yeah.
But the concept of the time waste, I think, is the really big one, isn't it? When it comes to sort of like service design, especially when you want to get the thing, whatever it is that the user or customer is trying to do. A lot of the time, the inefficiencies in processes stems from the fact that the customer's just waiting for stuff. It's being processed behind the scenes. It needs to go to someone who needs to get approval from someone who needs to do some manual process to do something. And it's all just time delays, isn't it? So I think it's helpful to think about that concept of waste as just being anything that prevents the customer from getting an output quickly. And then you can start to look at, okay, well, where in this process do we have that waste? And how can we then start to, make some improvements?
It's even rework. That's a huge one.
Yeah.
How many times within your process and within a service industry do you say to a customer, we'll do this, and then we'll contact you, or you contact us, even worse. And actually, the disappointing thing is, after that period of time, it's not been done to the specification that it was needed to. And then you're right back again in the same position you were. Which, I think it's fair to say that people's expectations around service have changed, and rightly so. I will hold my hands up and say that I'm quite impatient. I like things that are convenient. Who doesn't? We do adjust our expectations when things change, and why shouldn't we? And regardless of whether it's something like shopping, buying things online, banking, or even, in this case, like with Ovo, obviously we work in the space of energy, and that might not seem to people like it has such urgent requirements, but actually whether it does or doesn't is besides the point. How we feel about it is what dictates it.
Yeah.
So someone might not think that my query is urgent, but I might want to get my direct debit changed right now, and might not want to wait till tomorrow.
Yeah.
what's urgent to me, and the customer has a lot of views on that, and I think that that's changed.
Definitely. And one of the other things that's changed also in that respect, I suppose, is that the method through which customers are able to get things done is also beginning to change. When you've got your likes of ChatGPT that people are using in the workplace and at home, we've had the voice revolution of Alexa and Google Assistant, and that got people kind of comfortable to talking to stuff. And then there's been the kind of chatbot sort of revolution, if you like. And so now most companies have some degree of AI service provision, and the expectation of what that thing does and how it operates and what it can do is obviously rising as well, isn't it? Have you noticed that is the customer expectations of your self-service in general, but specifically the conversational AI components, have they kind of raised expectations at all?
Yeah, massively so. If you're dealing with customers who are dealing with companies that are using that technology, why would they not sit there and, if not expect it, then at the very least think themselves, well, I maybe didn't expect the company to have it, but actually it would be a lot better if they did. It is informing their experience. And so what was good enough yesterday or last year isn't necessarily going to be the case. And you can't become complacent about it. And I think that's one of the things where obviously, like Lean Six Sigma, I think really feeds itself well into continuous improvement. And even right now within the energy industry, I know there's a lot less competition in terms of like switching suppliers than there was pre-pandemic with the massive price changes that we're still seeing. But customers still have the right to choose and switch, even if they don't feel there's a huge margin to be saved in terms of money.
Mm.
If they think it's their experience and they're going to get their bills and manage other products they want to get with them in a more convenient way, that can be enough for people. Sometimes that's more than enough. They would actually rather pay more to have better experience. And I think that it's too simple to think that price is the only matter that customers care about. It's not. Each customer will have their own value depending on their needs and their expectations.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think that most companies these days that provide such a kind of like I don't know if the word commodity service is the right kind of terminology, but it's something that you can't live without and you have to have. It's a bit like banking,
Absolutely.
isn't it? A bit like government services. Like you have to have it, and therefore, and the vast majority of companies that provide those things are largely the same, because from an energy perspective, as long as I turn my light on and the switch on and the light comes on, that's what I expect to happen. So price is obviously a consideration, but again, price tends to sort of stabilize in the marketplace anyway. You don't have an electricity or an energy supplier that's like well more expensive than everyone else, because no one would use it. So it's kind of like when you've got price that's so competitive and the service provision is kind of in terms of like does the heating turn on or do the lights turn on, then what's left to differentiate on, to build relationships, to prevent churn, is really customer experience.
It is, and I think that with the amount of data that we have now and access to it, there's expectations and responsibilities that come with that. Now, obviously, not everyone in the UK has a smart meter or has one that works, but for those that do, there's an expectation. Well, you have my data, my meters are communicating with you, so why would you not use that to make sure that my billing, if I'm paying by direct debit, that's more accurate, more informative, and hopefully you can tell me how I can save money. Like I
Mm.
would expect that if there was a problem with my usage and suddenly it spiked, that I would get notified, something to maybe alert me, because it could be maybe my boiler's got a fault with it. Maybe I'm leaving some high energy appliance on in the background that I don't know about, and it's things like that that make a big difference to customers. And obviously, it's really easy for a lot of people to say, oh, as long as the lights come on and as long as I'm not getting anything telling me that I've forgot to pay a bill, then they're quite happy. But it just varies so much dependent on the customer. We do have so many people who are actually in a situation where they're in full poverty.
Hmm.
And so for many of those customers, it really will be a matter of real concern to them, because actually they really are in a position where they might try and turn on an appliance and they might not have any credit within their meter.
Mm.
And so it does become a lot more genuinely like a case of they need to be able to contact us and get help in a way that's frankly accessible,
Yeah.
but also easy.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. And it's one of them things, isn't it, where like energy companies have kind of gone from, I suppose, being the it's a bit like telco a little bit, which is that like going from being like the silent partner to being actually a little bit more active in helping? Because obviously there's a cost of living crisis. There is kind of like, high expectations when it comes to liaising with companies when you need something from them and all that kind of stuff. And so it's kind of like, in order to build those relationships, what else can you do? And I always, what is it? I can't remember I can't remember is it? I'm just trying to find here. I can't remember who come up with it basically, but there's the layers of product, isn't there? There's the core product, there's the actual product, and the
Yes.
augmented product. And I can't remember the person who come up with that, but essentially it's that augmented product, which is all of it, everything else that comes over and above the actual provision of the service and the product itself, but everything else that comes with it, like as you mentioned, notifying me that there's a spike in activity, or helping me save money or be more efficient. And it's that kind of like additional layer that you maybe might not expect, but all makes all the difference when it comes to keeping customers and keeping people happy.
It's true, and I think that from my experience over the past few years, I started out working on chat using our non-generative AI in the first instance, and that was a real eye opener for me, realizing that actually it shifted. The demand that we get inbound is actually more not towards our core service.
Mm.
It's actually the augmented. It's everything above. So a huge amount of contact is not about what actually on paper, if you were to describe to an alien what an energy supplier is, it's not about that. And that is something that I think continues to surprise me, what customers contact us about.
Interesting. Well, come on. Well, maybe we'll dive a little bit deeper into that. So when did you launch the chatbot then?
So our chatbot actually was launched before I started working on it. So I started working on our chatbot in the April of 2022, and it was launched, started getting piloted the previous October.
Okay.
And I think it had quite a slow, launch to begin with, because by the time I started working on it, it maybe only had around 10 very super high level umbrella intents, and a very small amount of our contact was going through chat at the time. It didn't really have the engagement that it needed to actually be considered like a substantial contact channel for us. It was still one of those things that just needed a lot more focus to actually become something that would be taken seriously. Because if you've got, let's say obviously you've got voice, you've got email, shockingly enough, you've still got post. We had WhatsApp on offer as well, and we also had social media channels. So if you're not actually handling a significant percentage of that contact, then your teams, your contact teams and the operational leaders are not going to focus their conversations about performance on that channel if it's just a tiny little thing that you've not actually scaled up. And so it needed a lot more focus. And I feel in hindsight, fortunate enough to come into it at the point where I could actually, help change it. And yeah, it's been quite the journey.
Nice. Well, yeah, we'll definitely get into what was there and what you did and stuff like that. But maybe we back up slightly and kind of cover what the, I suppose, impetus for doing it in the first place was like. I know it was maybe launched before your time, but as you come in there's this chatbot there already. Like, why was it there? What was you mentioned? You got email, you've got all these other channels. Like, what was the purpose of putting that there in the first place?
So the reason that why there was a need to provide that offering was actually just customer demand. It's like you say, the expectation was there. Other service providers, whether they were in the same industry or not, were offering it, and we recognised, well, actually, this is where customers want to meet us. There's an appetite and demand for it. So why are we not offering it? Actually, we should be making ourselves available to our customers in the way that they would like us to be. That's how are you going to provide a good service if you're not? So that was the initial thought, that they want to meet us there, so we should meet them there. And then obviously on top of that came the opportunity to provide support in a way that was consistent, but also, to your point, not restricted to when our advisors were actually, working in our conventional, contact hours. And that was obviously as well, because I know it might seem strange to some people, but we do genuinely get customers contacting us at all hours of the day and night. And if you give them that opportunity to self-serve during those times, if the tooling is accessible and easy to use, then they will. Because, frankly, who wouldn't want to if it's a need?
definitely, definitely. So you get there then. There's a chatbot already there. It has 10 intents or so. You said it wasn't doing particularly well. What was it about it that wasn't necessarily performing as might be expected?
The main challenge we had to begin with from the extensive customer feedback was that initially it just did not understand their
Mm.
query well enough, which classic problem, and that was a case of, well, it's straightforward. They've told us that's what the problem is. It doesn't recognise their query, and I understand that, because if I was speaking to you right now and you were saying, how can I help you, and I explained it fairly succinctly, you still didn't understand me, and I repeated it again, and you're thinking, this is not great. So the challenge was totally fair, and to be honest, it just needed a lot more investment put into it and time to actually train and to really refine. And within like Lean Six Sigma, they have that phrase like going to Gemba, which means like actually like walking the experience and doing it. And we just needed to actually get in amongst our customer experiences and really follow what they were experiencing. And that was um, ultimately more eye-opening and useful than talking amongst ourselves about what we thought hypothetically they might need and want and say. And I'm still continuing to be amused and interested about the different ways customers will express the same thing.
Mm.
Um, and,
Yeah.
and it's gotten more interesting as time's gone on. So as I say, started off working in the chat space, and like I say, been fortunate to still be involved in that now. And towards the end of Q1 last year, we started working more on our natural language understanding bots on voice,
Mm.
which was really exciting.
Nice, nice. Yeah, let's definitely touch on that. So on the just on the chatbot then. So what happened from that moment? So what was it supposed to be doing in the first place anyway? Like what those 10 intents, what was it actually supposed to do?
So obviously the intention was to understand, look, why is the customer contacting us? If there's information, if they're genuinely asking a question that's an answer that can be provided, then to give it to them, or to route them through to the right person to help them if it's a need for an action to be completed that they can't currently do by themselves, through their account, and get them there as quickly and easily as possible. And so the fact that the problem was clear in the feedback to begin with, well, you're not understanding what
Mm.
my query is, what my need is, that was very evident that was something we needed to overcome. And I would say that, to be honest, as far as challenges go, it was actually a pretty fortunate one in the end to have, because I think that my experience was that actually you put the time into it and you don't take it for granted that you're sort of like one and done in terms of training, that you could actually improve that quite reasonably, and we did. It just took a lot more effort than I think was imagined, when they first launched the pilot. I think that there was an assumption that you could use natural language understanding and just give a number of example utterances, and there you go. That's
Job done.
sufficient.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the truth is that like the way that we express ourselves is so much more varied and nuanced, and that for me is more interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I remember way back in, might have even been 2017, Google published something which was that they observed through Google Assistant interactions that there was over 7,000 ways that somebody could express that they wanted to set an alarm. And
Yeah.
so that just kind of points to the challenge of natural language understanding machine learning systems in general, really, is that it's how can you ever understand 7,000 different things without adequate training data, varied training data, a really good understanding of your intents and your customer needs and all that kind of stuff. And so I think beginning with cleaning things up in the first place is obviously a good place to start. There's so many chatbots out there even today that they fail at the very simple stuff, which is that understanding part. And there's lots of companies want to be like doing more stuff and automating more things and adding more capabilities, but actually you could probably get a lot from iterating what you've already got to get more performance out of the things that they're supposed to be doing in the first place.
It's really true, and I would say that we've done both of those things. So where we've been able to iterate and not need as much like technical support from our product teams to build more automated things that can actually, for example, like adjust your direct debit or take your meter reading. These things that have required that time for developers to do. We've actually been able to complement and say, well, if you're working on that right now, maybe you don't have the capacity in this current like sprint, whatever you're working in, we'll focus on this. And there was a lot of value we were able to drive drive through it, because the reality is that you can, I think, become quite complacent thinking that you've totally optimized it. But
Mm.
then, frankly, find that actually the demand changes. And, I know it sounds like it shouldn't be the case. Like, how much can have energy really changed in the space of what, like the past 2.5 years or whatever it is? I forget. It's probably coming closer to 3 years, but it really has. It genuinely has. We had that period, obviously, during the pandemic, where obviously the government launched the energy bill support scheme. That was absolutely massive in terms of demand, because of course it was. Every single person in the UK was entitled to it who had an energy bill, and it was a substantial amount of money. And of
Mm.
course, there was a huge amount of questions that customers had, especially early on when it was first announced, before all the details came through. And that was a huge change for us. You can imagine how many
Mm.
brand new utterances we had that had to be trained. And it was really imperative that we were able to give the customers the right information about that and support them,
Mm.
because at the time energy bills were such a high concern for people.
Yeah. Absolutely. So what happened after that then? So 2022 or so, you kind of go in there, you understand that this thing isn't understanding people as much as it should do. Presumably you go through some kind of exercise to sort that out. What's the journey been like from 2022 on the chatbot side to now?
It's been very iterative. So, like you say, we had that first hurdle of actually properly recognizing what customers were saying, identifying how we would match that up, what responses we would give, and we've learned a lot along the way, and really had to. Be very humble about the fact that there would be times we would try things and they wouldn't be a great success. And frankly, there's no one that's actually in this space that isn't sometimes having things that don't go perfectly well.
Mm.
And I think that as long as you're very quick to take the learnings and adjust and pivot and actually fix it and improve it, then that is fine, because there's no real, you're never going to make improvements if you're not willing to take some risks. It just has to be risks that you're able to, um, frankly, put the right controls in space around, that you're
Mm.
willing to accept, that are okay, that you can say, we maybe put this right. And if it doesn't work and it's not as clear and easy for customers to use, how quickly can we either fix it so that it is, or roll it back if we need to?
Mm.
And, as long as you're all aligned on what that looks like, and you have the right things to be able to switch it if you need to, then I think that's acceptable.
Mm.
Um, but without that alignment across all of your teams, then you're going to end up in a place where you're not ready. And so for us, it was really important that we had that good working relationship with all of the teams that are involved, because it really is. It's so many teams in our business that we work with. We have our product teams, we have our teams that manage our, call them like our Genesis team, but that's the platform that we use. We obviously have teams in customer experience. We have like comms teams, copywriters, all the rest of it. And I would say most importantly, I'm a little bit biased here, but
Mm.
our operational teams, who are like our internal customers. At the end of the
Mm.
day, we're there to make sure that we're not devastating their customer experience through the process of implementing bots before they reach an advisor, should they need to.
Mm.
And so that was obviously a primary concern as well. Yeah, our customer is the ultimate customer that we care about, but our internal customers care about those as well. So there was lots of people that were vested in that, and lots of challenges along the way.
Yeah. So what is it doing now then? So it started out as predominantly a kind of question answer routing type of
Yes.
thing. Is that still the predominant use case, or have things matured since then?
Things have matured a lot. So initially, it was very, very simple. We would really, to begin with, in those very early days, once we had the intents recognised, this was obviously a totally different model. We would often be like, "Well, we have an article on our website that gives you this answer,"
Mm.
and came quite quickly to realise that actually, for a lot of customers, they don't want to have to click on a link to find an answer. Funnily enough, and they would rather you just give them the answer, which it actually now seems really laughable to me that I didn't realize that in the first place. But you live and you learn. I think as long as you are actually in the position where you'll go and check what actually happened, how did they experience this, and take on board the customer feedback that you get, then that's fine. It's okay to be wrong as long as you're learning and
Mm.
taking that lessons moving forward, because you only have your own experience and the experience of the people around you, and that you can consult with and peers to help guide you along. And to begin with, like 2 and a bit years ago, there was nobody that I knew outside of the company that was in this space. I didn't really have the same working relationships with the other teams at Ovo that I do now. And we didn't have as wide a working group with people with different perspectives. So it really has developed. So now we have obviously much more conversational flows. They're complemented by some wonderful automated solutions that our bot teams have built to complement, so that where there's frankly an ability for a customer to do something via a bot that can complete it, they can. And customers, when they want to do that, enjoy that, because frankly, then they can move on with their life. I enjoy that. But we had to balance that with recognizing that for many of our customers, they either won't want to, which is totally their prerogative, or won't be able to, for whatever reason, use that service. And so latterly, it's been focusing on how can we improve it so that we're not just routing them through to the right advisor to support them, but making that experience better for them as well, so that we're giving the advisor we're connecting them with as much information to make that experience less effortful for both. So you can actually just have a enjoyable conversation. Because some of the biggest contract drivers that we have are customers just frankly in times of their life where they're busy, like moving home. One of the most stressful things you can do. You don't want to be having a stressful period having to contact utility companies to set up your account. You want it done, you want a nice quick conversation, knowing that it's taken care of, and hopefully you move on with whatever is your actual priority for that day or that week, which is probably boxes and all the rest of it. And I think that there's a lot of information that we would want to gather to make sure that we set up a customer's account correctly. And if we do that all piece by piece when we're on the phone with a customer, actually the reality is that takes quite a lot of time to do back and forth. And we could lighten the load massively while still getting the right information by using bots to help us with that. And that's been really exciting to do latterly. You always hope that things are going to go well. And I think I try and temper my expectations so that it's a case of, as long as it's an improvement and it meets the requirements we know we need to have, then we can always iterate. But it's been great to see some of the customer feedback that we've had since launching that, and them just saying what a great experience it was and how much they were able to then have actually a more enjoyable, human conversation like we're having with our staff, which is nice, because a lot of the times I don't think people really think of contacting an energy company as being like an enjoyable experience where they can actually connect and have a pleasant conversation.
Nice. So would it be fair to say then that the use cases wise, it's answering questions, it's still routing to the right agent, but also passing across the context of the conversation, perhaps to help the agent out and maybe to shorten average handle time or what have you. And it's fulfilling certain processes as well. Did I get that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have various automated process that will complete, obviously depending on the context. For example, whether it's IDing and verifying, so we have data protection bots, we have bots to complete your meter readings, to do payments, the list goes on. And that's obviously a really vital part of it. There is a huge demand and expectation that customers should be able to do these things, whether it's on their online account or whether through a bot. But a lot of it for us is customers who are really vulnerable, who may actually just need our support. It's not that they might not be willing to use it, they might be, but there might be other issues that mean that for them they need that further assistance. So it's very broad in terms of the different drivers, but how we implement it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so you mentioned at the beginning that the goal of doing this was to, I suppose, reach some degree of parity with the expectations of customers. If competitors are doing it and there's an expectation now that you should be able to just express yourself and talk naturally to get your issues resolved, etc. So it seems as though like the goals of it was kind of like experience based and
Absolutely.
making sure you're providing a good experience for customers. Obviously, in doing so, you want to, as you mentioned, you want to help the staff. You don't want to throw a spanner in the works operationally. You want to make things better than they were before you arrived operationally. So how do you then judge the success of it, given that you've got those two sides of the coins to work out, haven't you? You do the right thing for the customer, you do the right thing operationally. Like, how do you go about kind of quantifying the success of the chatbot initially? We'll talk about the voice bit in a minute, but the chatbot specifically at the minute.
I don't think those things are mutually exclusive at all. I really actually think they're going hand in hand, because from speaking to like our colleagues and our frontline teams, like that is their job. They want to be able to help customers, but it's helping them to be able to help those customers, whether that's making their job easier, so reducing their cognitive load, because frankly there's so much information that if you didn't have the right resources providing you the correct information, then the chances of you either sitting there thinking, "Oh, give me a second while I try and remember," or giving the wrong information is incredibly high. But also, I mean, I'll hold my hands up and say that if you said to me, Alannah, here's like 30 bits of information that you probably need to get to help make sure this customer's account is set up right and they're on the best thing for them in terms of value for money and all the rest of it, and we make sure we know if they need, for example, to have a priority services register on their account because they have maybe medical equipment that would be needed. What's the chances of me remembering to take all of those things by myself and make sure that I've got is pretty slim.
Yeah.
And when I first joined the business, which at the time was still part of SSE, it was obviously years ago, I'm really showing my age, I was in a role where there was a huge compliance element and there were so many things I was expected to remember. And it was incredibly hard to do that consistently every single time, as well as actually remembering that it's a human being on the phone and trying to balance a pleasant and enjoyable customer experience. It was something that I remember after I would like finish my days. I would have parts of the script and compliance elements in my head, and it's because it was such a high cognitive load. So I guess when I think then to working on how can we help our colleagues, it is in reducing that. It's making it so that you're not at the end of that call or that night thinking, did I do that correctly? Did I get all the information, and worrying about it. And if you can do that, then the advisor is going to be happier. Their customer's going to be happier because they're going to get the right information. They're probably going to have a nicer conversation, a bit more pleasant, maybe have a laugh, maybe actually leave that conversation thinking that was nice. And it was a lot less effort for both.
Yeah.
But they got the better outcome.
Yeah, 100%. We had a client recently who they call it rubrics, which I can't remember what it stands for now, but it's basically like certain things that the agents have got to say in order to kind of meet the brand guidelines, if you like. So they always have to ask, how's your day? They always have to do this, that, and the other. And it's kind of like when we did some user research with them to understand like where their pain points are, because exactly as you said, one side feeds the other, and they're both two sides of the exact same coin. If you want to try and improve the customer experience, you have to improve the agent experience because they're both basically the same thing. So that's what we found basically, is that some of the agents are going to bed at night and all they're thinking about is these rubrics and the things that they have to say all the time. And sometimes they're in conflict with each other because, all they want to do, they know exactly what they need to do to solve this problem, but they've got to jump over these three hurdles first because they've got to ask how you are, you've got to ask this, you've got to do that. And it's just like, you talk about kind of like value delivery and waste elimination, and sometimes it's kind of like intense for the agent to have to do all of these certain things and fulfill all of these processes that often just get in the way of actually helping.
It's incredibly stressful, and I think that it's a terrible irony that you could be in a role which is considered like entry level and have more stress and anxiety worrying about what you said, did you do the right thing, than people who could be getting paid substantially more. That's wrong. Like you shouldn't have that for anybody. But also, at the end of the day, like what's the goal here? Is the goal to center the customer and listen to them and support them, or is it that you take them down a rabbit hole because you've got questions you need to ask and you need to make sure that you've identified them correctly, you've passed security before you speak to them, and that's why having things like the data protection bot that come in before to try and identify customers where we can has made a huge difference. Because granted, not every customer is going to necessarily maybe pass. Maybe they don't have an account yet, so you couldn't pass it because you don't have it. Well, that's fine. We recognize you're not a customer. We're not going to ask you the same information. But previously, before that was the case, you can imagine, just like most contact centers, how most calls started. I take your account number. And it was almost like, I think people sound robotic, but it's because the pressure of scripts and compliance, and they're worried about, well, if I don't do this, am I going to get in trouble? Am I potentially going to lose my job? And so you're losing sight of what actually needs to be centered because of all the pressure that's on there to do those things. And I think, if I say like cognitive load every single time I speak to people, I think it sounds like a little bit like pretentious, but that is such a big enabler, not just for our advisors, but also for our customers as well.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be absolutely mind-boggling to actually express what you're needing help with and get the help you need.
Yeah.
That shouldn't be that hard. But the reality is that, to be honest, sometimes energy is a little bit complicated, and it totally depends on the customers. For some, they won't be. But when I think about some more specific use cases, like for customers that have what we call like multimeter, like complex metering systems, which they're spread across the UK. If a person moved into a property with one of those meters, you would genuinely be like, "How do I even read that?" And rightly so, because they look like something out of I don't even know how to describe it. There's so many meters. They're often dial meters. They're super complex. And granted, that is quite niche. That's not the majority of people, but it's still something you have to cater for and think about. Well, how can I improve their experience?
Mm.
Why should we have to be stressing every month or every quarter to make sure they get a bill that's actually accurate? Because that's what
Yeah.
people expect.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you touched on something there which I think is really interesting, which you're mentioning cognitive load and high cognitive load, which really, in a customer journey or in the day of an agent, high cognitive load essentially equals friction, doesn't it?
Mhm.
The higher the cognitive load, the more friction there is in doing the task that you're trying to do. And obviously there's a huge effort, quite rightly, in trying to remove friction, which goes back to the Lean Six Sigma concept. Is if high cognitive load slows down the process and makes it challenging, therefore it's waste potentially. Therefore, or maybe high cognitive load means that people, certainly it's a bad customer experience if the customer's got high cognitive load, but even on the agent side, if the agent's got high cognitive load, after 4 hours, they're nowhere near as productive as they were 4 hours ago. And therefore there is waste because things then take longer further down the line type of thing. So in order to remove that cognitive load, you mentioned their effort. Is effort something that you track in terms of the customer effort of using the chatbot and the agent effort of handling customer queries and stuff?
Yeah, so we track both the effort as well as the satisfaction. It's funny because effort for me is one that says a lot about accessibility, and obviously I get that when people think about how they're designing, for example, let's talk about chat, they're not often putting that at center of mind, and so they might be thinking, well, this works, but does it work if you're using a screen reader? And is it accessible for people who maybe don't have a reading age at the level that your copy's been written at? Because that's something that I think for some people they're privileged not to realise that for many people in the case that isn't. They're not going to be able to understand that. You're using jargon and sentences that are too complex. So
Mm.
how can you simplify it? Because you don't, on first instance, you don't know the customer that you're speaking to. So you have to write and make it default as accessible as possible.
Mm. And do you measure effort like kind of like qualitatively, as in it's an actual question that's asked to the user, or do you use it kind of quantitatively, and in like it's a programmatic based on signals?
Both.
Mm.
So we both ask the customer, and they give us their they give a score, they give verbatim, as well as then evaluation within the interaction itself, whether it's chat or voice or whatever medium.
Mm.
And I do think that for me, the customer, feedback, I'm more interested in what the customer thinks about it than whether our system picks up on it, because a lot of it can be very much down to perception. So if, for example, we have a conversation at the end of it, the analytics doesn't think that I expressed any frustration or dissatisfaction, that could be because maybe the way that I communicate isn't in line with the expectations, but maybe I'm just not actually saying the words that would trigger it. Doesn't mean that I'm not unhappy. Doesn't mean that I felt that it was a good experience. So I think that they're useful, and I
Mm.
definitely think it has a place because it can provide insight that you might not get from the customer. Maybe the customer isn't interested in providing it. Maybe your experience was so bad, or they're so busy, and they have frankly more important things to do with their lives, which
Mhm.
many people do. So I don't think it's a case of like one or the other, but I would definitely trust what the customer says and scores it more highly than what our system thinks. Oh, that was positive. There wasn't any dissatisfaction, no disgruntlement, no, none of that was picked up,
Mm.
because I don't think that everything is really always what it seems.
Yeah, yeah, agreed, agreed. So on the chat side, there was a chatbot there originally. It wasn't doing particularly well. You went in there, made some improvements to how it understands and comprehends, over time and over the years, you've added more kind of like self-service options in there, end-to-end transactions in there. It's doing a good job of routing. It's doing a good job of helping agents in terms of passing through context and stuff like that. And then overall, seemingly, is it fair to say it's had a positive impact on those measures, CSAT and agent satisfaction, stuff like that?
Yeah, no, it really has, and that's not something that happened overnight. It was definitely, gradual, and it took a lot of input from the right people to help make sure that we were going in the right direction with everything. Because there was times when, you can imagine, especially when we started developing some of the automated solutions, that can sometimes worry people within frontline roles. They think, well, are you removing my job? Is that what you're doing there? So we had to make sure that we engaged correctly with our teams, let them know this is what we're doing. This is so that we can support you, support our customers, help make sure that at the end of the day, you're not leaving there frazzled with a migraine, worried about whether you're going to get a call the next day, and engage with them in ways to let them know that actually we also really want to help you work much more closely with us, because you can help us understand and improve these processes massively. At the end of the day, there's so much value from our teams that are frontline operational. And I think that that's one of the things that within Lean Six Sigma is really emphasized: underutilized talents. And I think that it would be really elitist and wrong to think that you can't add so much value and improvement by, frankly, consulting with and engaging with those people. So some of the people that we've worked with and then that have joined the team that I lead, the Scrum team, have roles which have been heavily operational, and then a lot of them have then been able to get the right experience and then move on and secure other roles as well. So it's been great for their development, and we've had the benefit of their input, which has been invaluable.
Yeah, and sometimes you can't hire that in anyway. Sometimes, like people who've been on the front lines, they've spoke to the customers, they understand exactly what situation customers are in, they understand the importance of being customer first, they understand the business and the processes and the different systems and all that kind of stuff. It's actually quite common in large organisations that the people that end up heavily involved in the automation are the people who used to be right on the front lines dealing with customers day to day.
Some of the best input that we've had has come from our advisors, for sure. Because if you get the right engagement with people who are actually, like, that's what they're interested in, they actually care, they're very conscious of the opportunities there are to improve things, then their ideas, as you say, they're going to be so rich and so detailed. And you're not going to come up with them from people that have never actually had that firsthand experience. And I do think there's a lot to be said for going in and, looking at listening to calls or reading transcripts and actually understanding it. But there's also something about the immediacy and thinking about how would you respond and support that customer, because that's really what you're trying to replicate in some instances with a good, AI agent, isn't it? A natural response and empathy. Because if the goal is to be able to support customers, especially when your contact center is closed, and if it's a high stress emotive thing, for example, what if a customer thinks they've got a gas leak? How can you make sure that your whatever AI you're using gives not just the correct information, but responds in a way that is going to help make that customer feel that they're supported? And that, I think, is so interesting. There's still so many opportunities that we have, but I think that's what makes it enjoyable. And I'm sure there'll be more. There'll be more challenges along the way, because I think that one thing for me that is still really, really challenging is that if the customer doesn't expect that it will be a good experience, because they've maybe had negative experiences elsewhere, they might not engage.
Yeah.
And that's something that no matter how brilliant actually it could be, potentially, if they're not going to engage, then you have to think about, well, how can I still make it a good experience for them? But maybe granted, it's not going to be as good as it would be. Because there's nothing worse than that sort of circle of just trying to get around an AI agent and not being able to, if you feel that you need to or want to. And I think that should always be an option.
Yeah. Speak to a human. Well, one of the things, though, one of the ways in which you can seek to increase adoption in those situations is to make it the default. And one of the places where it is the default is in the call center. You make a phone call and the phone call is answered by an AI agent or a virtual assistant of some description. you're talking to them already, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
So like, what you mentioned there, you know, going into voice and stuff like that. Where did the need to do something in the voice channel begin?
To be honest, there was so much complexity within our voice. As you say, like it is the legacy, like mammoth channel. And you can imagine over the years just how much complexity there was. We had different business areas that were changing, new teams, just new phone numbers, campaigns. You know, anyone that's worked within contact centers, I think will have a very good idea of what I mean. And we needed to simplify it for so many reasons, so that our customers wouldn't, for example, pick up a letter they got from us the last time, find a phone number, and end up down a completely different end of the business than they meant to. And we needed to do that because it was terrible for customers, but it was also an absolute burden for us as well. Because if you make your system too complex, you can't maintain it. And you end up with issues. So the complexity had gotten to the point where it needed to. And so, as you can imagine, I mean, I can think of nothing worse than phoning a company and hearing like the dreaded list of options, because I feel like it's never what I'm calling for. And to be honest, once we actually like sat down and listened to some of the instances of what we were making customers listen to, it was a real eye opener. And I think when no one was in disagreement about the fact that we could do a lot better, not only was that horrible, just having to listen to that to get to the thing that you wanted to, for some customers, none of the options were what they wanted to listen to. So we knew straight away, well, if we remove all of this and implement natural language understanding, and as you say, put in a nice brief message to let them know, tell us why you're calling, as long as we would do the work on the back end to make sure that we could recognise it and quickly make sure we're putting them through to the right people or bringing the right information, whatever it is, we could do a lot better. And so that was the imperative. We then said, well, where can we start with? Because clearly we have a very complex system. We're going to have to start somewhere. We won't be able to, unfortunately, do this on every single like area of the business that we have. That was too, one, big a job, but also too risky, you know, because we would obviously take some time to train it up and get to the point where the business were satisfied that it was working well for our customers. So we looked at implementing it in an area where we had customer contact that was unrecognised. Where, you know, it's a number, we don't recognise the number, maybe they don't have an account number they're able to input, we can match to. We saw that as the ideal opportunity to roll it out to first, because they had the most to gain. Because frankly, if we're not able to recognise you and say, oh, that's Kane, we know this is his account, this is probably what he's contacting us about, then they probably had the worst experience with the before. So that's where we started. And I would say that like most customers responded pretty openly to engaging with it. Like you said, it was quite natural to respond. However, some customers obviously had reservations. I think because they were so used to, frankly, a traditional IVR experience, that they would just, frankly, be having a conversation about something in the background. But then that comes back to saying, well, one, you do have to expect that there is that change process that people go through. Not everybody will adapt to things with the same sort of like agility as others will, but then also thinking, well, how can you actually like alert customers to let them know that this is about to happen? How do you do that in a way that isn't obnoxious, like saying, you know, listen closely? So we moved from there, and then we basically just went on to our next opportunity, which was for customers with, you know, pay-as-you-go meters that they top up. And that was a really big opportunity for us because there was just so many different requests that they would contact us about, and a lot of them for those customers were really urgent. Like I say, you know, I spoke about earlier, customers not necessarily knowing whether they're going to have any credit left in their meters. So it really was imperative for us that we make that experience of actually understanding this is why they're calling. They maybe need to borrow some credit from us because they actually maybe don't get paid until the end of the month, and they are in a position where if they don't get money from us, that'll be them with no power. How can we make sure that we get through to them and support them as quickly as possible? And that was really good because we ended up working really closely with our operational teams to roll that out and get their support and engagement with advisors. And ultimately it meant that we were able to reduce the rate at which the customers were transferred, reduce repeat contacts, improve customer experience, improve customer effort, and then improve service levels as well off the back of that. So that was really, really brilliant. And that was rolled out partly while I was off sick last year after my accident. So I have to give a lot of credit to my team for actually continuing to do and stay calm and actually do the great work they do without me being there. Because I remember being in hospital thinking, this is just really about to, all go live and really be ramped up massively. I thought it might be really stressful for them, but they did the great work,
Nice.
and I was very, very proud of them.
Nice. And you were able to test it from hospital, at least.
You're going to laugh, but when I woke up after my first surgery, the first thing that I said to the nurse was something about reporting. It must have been on the mind. But of course, the nurse was very kind and said something polite to me and then walked away. And by the time she came back, I guess I'd, stopped when whatever delirium I was in from the anesthesia. But it was, yes, definitely good to come back when I did come back to work. And started my phased return to see how well it was working and to be able to, validate, right, what do we do next?
Yeah. And so the aim of that then, it sounds like, was the initial classification in order to route. Is that the use case, is routing it to the right area, or is there also some self-service going on in there as well?
Yeah, we were doing both. To be honest, by that point, by the time we moved into the natural language understanding on our IVRs for voice, we felt more ambitious. We had that experience of our chatbots behind us, and we were game to do anything we could do, any opportunities that we felt were going to give a good experience for our customers and our business. We were there. So from the immediate implementation, we had some things that were self-serve with automated options available, and then we've iterated and continued to do that. And I think that, going back to what you said earlier, when we're trying to offer these things to customers, it is an offer. It's not a demand, because frankly, look, who are we to say that you would be better to go on and do this on a different channel? If you'd like to, then it's there, and it's certainly something we're proud to say is accessible and easy and convenient to use. But equally, if you want to stay on the phone and speak to someone, then that's great as well. Really, when we started offering more soft deflection, just to give the customers the option to be sent a text with a link so they could carry on doing that online, and it was just there should they want it, and if not, then that's fine. It was surprising in some instances to see how popular that was in the uptake, because we've kind of set our expectations, well, we won't bank on it being necessarily popular, but the proof really for us was on the other side of it. If they do go and try it, how easy is it? Because if it is easy and appealing and they're able to get through it and actually leave that thinking, right, I'm done, then that will actually dictate, frankly, whether they'll come back and do it again and actually just go to that in the first instance. But I think it's really easy to overestimate how aware your customers are of what options are available to them. And especially when you have been working for a company for a long while, you become very, what's the word? It's you got bias, haven't you? You know your business and your options that are available, and so you start to think, well, if they wanted to do that, they would. But actually, from a customer lens, especially if they're in a moment of stress or just high change, like moving home, the last thing they're thinking about is to check on your website all the options that you have for how you can self-serve.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so last question then. We've spoken a lot here around all the efforts that you've been doing, some great efforts by the sounds of things on the chat channel, on the voice channel. One in terms of like answering questions, routing to the right place, self-service options. It sounds as though you've matured a great deal over the years. What has been the biggest challenge in any of those areas, chat or voice, that you've had to overcome in order to make this successful?
Sure. I think to be honest, the biggest challenge was getting the right buy-in to get confidence to see that not only are customers enjoying it, but that we can actually shift our resource so that where we're seeing customers start to engage with more, for example, on chat, yes, we're willing to shift that and see that maybe actually we do have more contact now. Because, when we think about our contact centers, oftentimes there's a real worry that you're going to ruin your service levels if you say we're now anticipating less calls and more of whatever else, or actually we see that demand's reduced altogether because now, as you say, self-service is more popular. Like, when people have responsibility over those types of budgets, and that comes down to whether they're going to get a good performance review and they're at that level, there's a lot of pressure associated with it. So there's a risk aversion. So we had to be able to prove with a lot of data substantiated over time that no, it wasn't just a blip, and actually come together to see How do we make sure that not only we prove to you that this is working, but we continue to validate? And that process was probably the most challenging, but also obviously the most rewarding, because at the end of the day, if you don't actually quantify, to your point, the benefit for your business, then did it really ever happen? Because, quite frankly, there's always so many things going on in most businesses that it is usually difficult to actually ascertain how much of one particular change has been influenced by any individual thing. So if you don't have a clear process for establishing the opportunity of something in the first place and really validating the benefit, then how can you actually say to the people who ultimately decide whether your job is, really adding value to the business, whether it does? So that for us was probably our biggest challenge. But I would say that once we got into a good way of working, and it just took a lot of back and forth and willingness to learn and adjust, we ended up in a really good rhythm with that.
Nice. Yeah, I think ultimately no one's doing this for shits and giggles. The business needs to see an outcome, and that outcome needs to be proven, and that's all you can do. Because if it's not doing what it needs to do, then there's no point in doing it. And I think that's partly partly the mistake I think that has been made in the past, is where a business has got some kind of AI solution. It hasn't been optimized, as you mentioned. Ovo's wasn't at the very beginning, and they've said, right, well, it obviously doesn't work. Let's get rid of it then, rather than optimizing it and then proving that it's working and demonstrating that over time it's improving and getting better. And I think it's absolutely crucial.
I would say there's not a lot of appetite, as you can imagine, to invest in anything, let alone an entire contact channel, if it doesn't deliver value for in the day the customers in the business. So you're right, that had to be central for us, and it will continue to be. But then that comes back to why the value is, well, what's valuable to your customers and what's valuable to your business, and how do you work towards those? Because if that's your North Star and you keep on top of that and don't take that for granted, that what was good enough yesterday is good enough today, then I think it lends itself well towards saying, well, what can we do next? How can we iterate? How can we improve?
Yeah.
And I think that for me, that's been really interesting, because even if you think you, for example, had to completely reach the point where you were done, as the technology changes and as we have new opportunities to utilize AI in different ways, you could effectively sort of start over and totally reimagine it and create a brand new service that is much, much better, which I find really interesting.
Definitely. As the technology improves, large language models, I know we didn't get a chance to chat about generative AI and stuff like that, but I mean, as these models improve, the capabilities that you have are just far greater. And so the stuff that was previously off limits is perhaps now within limits. And so it's like, I've never met a company yet that's kind of reached the point. In fact, I've met lots of companies who've reached the point where they say we've hit the wall and we don't know what to do next. But when you scratch the surface and you start having a look, it's like, well, you can improve this already dramatically. And what about all the rest of these use cases? So there's always somewhere to go. There's always more features, more value that can be had. And as the technology improves, as it has been doing in the last sort of 2 years or so, it opens up new opportunities to explore new use cases as well. So for me, I still am of the belief that over time, businesses are going to be basically conversational front ends. AI is going to be the front touch point for every business across every channel, and it's going to be essentially the front door that mediates all interactions, essentially. And that's kind of the thing I find enjoyment in is seeing companies like Ovo, who are kind of on the way to that. You've got a couple of channels up now, you've got some good use cases up and running, and it's almost like, although you've come a long way and you've matured and you are mature compared to lots of other comparable companies, it's still there's so much more opportunity out there that to take it to where it could go.
Yeah, no, that's exactly my sentiment, and I think that I still feel like we're still really early in our journey with it, because there is so much more that we could do. So that's very exciting, thinking about 2025. So maybe we can come back and talk more about generative AI next time and tell you where we're at.
Definitely. Wicked. Thank you so much, Alannah. Apologies, I know we've gone over time there, but I appreciate you sticking around.
No,
appreciate you sharing.
Really enjoyed that.
Nice one. Appreciate you sharing your insights, and appreciate you all for tuning in. We'll see you on the next one. Thanks very much. Bye now.